What is up, guys, and welcome back to my channel. I feel like that sentence is ingrained in my brain. So first and foremost, apologies for the dickhead title to this video. It's an appropriate title. As someone British and also generally not too much of a dickhead, pains me to write. First things first, this video is going to be relatively long. I've made sure to put chapters on it so you can click through to the appropriate times for you. But essentially, I wanted to do a video that was a compilation of every single organisation and study and planning and revision and essay and everything tip that I learned throughout my time at Oxford. I used to have loads and loads and loads and loads of study vlogs on my channel, which would have all of these types of tips, all of the, you know, like how I write an essay, how I do this, blah, 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 blah. So I wanted to put it all into one video that you can hopefully refer back to if this is helpful to you. So to give you a bit of background on my uni experience, I started Oxford in September, October 2015. I graduated in 2019 after a 3-year course, which pretty much all of them are. So I guess one of the most defining factors for me was that I started YouTube when I went to university, or just before I went to university, but wasn't really using it properly. And so over my 3 years there, regardless of what was kind of happening in the rest of my career, I always wanted to finish my time there. I was very vocal about that. I didn't have a great first year. I remember doing a video on my first year being like, how terrible my first year was at Oxford. And I feel like lots of people experience that at university because there's like this huge expectation of what your first year is going to be like, especially if you're like going to your dream university and you think you're going to meet all of these people and it's going to be whatever you kind of expect of it. It's never probably going to live up to your expectations. For some people it does. Congratulations. For me it definitely didn't. I had a terrible time. I do think it's a very particular experience. It's very work heavy. For context, I had about 10,000 words a week every single week, but essentially I spent 3 years there working really hard and started my first business in my first year there, which is now like 7 years old, and as a result spent about 3 years chronicling my entire journey at Oxford, for better or for worse, on the internet. I spent hours and hours writing up this video plan because I felt bad about not having all of that stuff up anymore. Little disclaimer that this video will be mostly applicable for people doing humanities subjects because I did a humanities subject. As I mentioned, for context, I was writing about 10,000 words a week and we were examined every trimester term in the UK. If I use the word term, it's essentially what you refer to as a semester or trimester. They would examine us at the beginning of pretty much every single term on the stuff from the previous term, and obviously in your essays you had to be doing well. So although it wasn't counting as a percentage towards your degree, you would have been asked to leave if you weren't doing well in those kind of essays that weren't even examined, if that makes sense. So it did create this pressure to constantly be performing well, which I felt a lot because essentially there's this fucking stupid rule at Oxford, which is that you, and at Cambridge as well actually, that you cannot have a part-time job. And the idea of that is because it works in 8-week terms, so they're super short terms, 3 8-week terms a year. Where did you come from? But yeah, the logic was that there were these 8-week terms, so they were super short, so that you could, between each term there was about a month and a half, so the logic was that you could earn the money that you needed to earn outside of those 8 weeks, which is classist at best, I'd say. But essentially I knew that I wasn't allowed a job and I had started a business and I was also having quite a public job in the way that I was doing kind of YouTube and social media. So I kind of made sure that I never ever missed a deadline, you know, kind of just flopped on something intentionally, because obviously none of it was examined, so there was a temptation to do that sometimes just when it was like too much work. And so I took it very seriously because I was constantly terrified that I was about to be kicked out of the university because I knew that they knew I had a job. Less terrified to say that now, considering I don't go there anymore and no one can kick me out. If you're not a humanities student, I hope this video will still be super helpful. It's all around organisation, planning, semester planning, deadline planning, etc, etc, etc. But I also have sections on essay tips as well. Obviously my experience at university was defined by the fact that I was doing an essay-based subject, so there's going to be a huge element of that, so I just want to warn you on that. You might be wasting your time. You might be wasting your time anyway, so just And then another very important disclaimer is that I want to be very clear that I'm not the type of person who believes that you should just be studying at university. I do not think university is just about studying. When I hopefully have children, I would like them to see university as purely what the most they're going to learn for their life. I feel like, completely transparently, unless you're doing a vocational course, I think that's one of the most important things you can go to university for: being self-sufficient, meeting people from all different backgrounds, getting kind of friends for life that aren't entirely dependent on like the area you grew up in, or all of these different things. There's this like Mel Robbins quote that I think I heard on Call Her Daddy. Let me find it for you. Does anyone else have a note in their phone that's essentially just all the good things they ever heard? Right, Mel Robbins' advice for students: don't let studying get in the way of your education. Which I believe and stand by. Go off, Mel. But I also very, very, very strongly believe that in order to have fun and get the most out of your university experience, you have to be doing well. If you're spending your time slipping on your grades and you're constantly getting that feedback, you're not even going to be able to have fun. So I see time management as a form of stress management. That makes me sound super fun, but I stand by it. So what I generally mean by all of this is, don't let your whole university experience become about studying because you do not plan your time effectively. If you do not plan your time effectively, you are not going to be able to do all of the things you want to do in terms of societies, in terms of going out, doing well at university, getting an internship, whatever it is you want to do. You have to be good at planning your time. I don't care if you want to spend 5% of your time doing your stuff for university. You need to be doing that then effectively, and probably planning even more effectively to be able to allow you to do more of other things. So just bear that in mind. So in this video, in my 8-page and thousands of word plan for this video, because I wanted to make sure I got everything in and I wanted to make sure it was really good advice, we are going to talk about general tips, things I think you absolutely should be doing, super low lift, super easy, will make your experience so much easier, how to plan your time effectively, non-negotiables, how to stick to deadlines, how to write a good essay in terms of the process, how to reference, how to write a good dissertation, how to take good notes, how to create a revision timetable, revision tips themselves. And that is all I could fit into this video, and I'm worried this video is already going to be about 3 hours long with all of that. That is why I'm going to create chapters. You can come and self-serve. I'm not going to do 10 different videos on this. But first things first, completely shameless plug. About 2 years ago, I wrote a book on time management. It is something I believe very, very strongly about. The book went to #1 on the Sunday Times bestseller list. Sickening. Literally, watch a British person try to plug themselves. I then created a planner around the concepts within the book so that you could essentially have a planner that laid it all out for you in terms of how you're planning your day with the methods in the book. Sounds really complicated, not complicated at all. It is not the type of thing that you'll do for one day and then forget to ever do it again. It's super easy, takes 5 minutes at the beginning of every day, if that, and the same amount of time you would just be doing your to-do list. That planner then got up to a wait list of at one point 75,000 people. And so we've basically just been producing those planners since then. They look like this. They're called the Productivity Method planners. They're currently sold out, but they go back into pre-order, so you can pre-order one. We generally only do them on pre-order at midday, so 12 p.m. on the 6th of June. So if you want to get your hands on one of those, do. But that is not the point of what I wanted to say. When I was at university, I found myself making the same revision timetables, semester planning things, planning my months out, planning my weeks out, lecture timetables, module planning, all of these different things. I was doing them again and again and again, and I could not understand why there had not been a planner made somewhere where you just fill in that stuff. Like, we all know that we're going to have a semester or a term or whatever it is, and you're going to need to fill in like your deadlines and the weighting of each deadlines and your tutors and your lecture timetable and all of these different things. Why has something not been made to take the work out of that for you? So I was literally like drawing it up on notebook, paper, term after term after term. I cannot express to you enough how much this is not my audience at all. It was once upon a time, but now my audience is like 50% 25 to 34-year-olds. Generally people who are not at university, obviously some of them will be, but based on the fact that I was already creating planners, I just wanted to create one that was going to be, I guess, like the student Bible. Like, you could get at the beginning of your time at university, and it would set you up in terms of like how you need to plan your terms, how you need to plan your modules, how you need to plan your deadlines, how you need to plan your like writing your dissertation or project planning and all of these different things. And from week to week, a kind of dated planner of exactly what you should be doing. And I just could not understand why something that takes all of that work out of it for you didn't exist, where people are going to university year after year after year, needing these same things, and nothing was out there that was genuinely made by students or someone who genuinely understood what you need in that case there were just like regular planners where you could kind of like just slot the fact that you also have societies and deadlines and also maybe a part-time job and all of these things. When I went to university, I found it incredibly overwhelming at the beginning, and that is from someone who went to an extremely privileged private school. I believe very, 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 very strongly that there should be better information accessible to students in general, and better information that doesn't just assume that everyone's coming to university with the same knowledge of how to plan their time or how to write an essay or any of these different things. And that is what I spent a lot of my time at university talking about, because I found it absolutely crazy, the difference between how confident people felt when they arrived at Oxford, when they were from private school versus when they were from state school. And I'm absolutely not saying that I'm the person to fix this at all, but I do believe that sharing information publicly and being very clear about the things that helped you helps to even that out, especially as I am someone who was privately educated in a ridiculously privileged situation, and therefore was given a lot of tools to be able to understand how I should be planning, understand how I should be writing essays. I still don't think that education generally is good enough. You arrive at university and they're like, well, you should know how to write a good essay, so here's a topic to write it on, rather than genuinely helping you in that respect. But I believe that there should be more access to that type of information, and it should be more even. So I guess I wanted to make sure that I was able to collate everything that I did learn within that time to hopefully make that easier for people who might feel a little bit overwhelmed when they go to university, or generally you're just someone who wants to stay organized and you want to be given a framework just to fill in, like put your modules in here, put the dates in here, and this is how it will help you get there. So before we go on to all of the topics of this actual video, I promise you I will be giving you in-depth explanations on all of them. I just want to show you this planner because I think this is the best thing I have ever created, and it's not even for my fucking audience, because very, very, very few of them are students, but I'm very proud of it, and it's something that I would have fucking loved to have when I went to university. They come in 3 different colours, but they're the exact same thing inside. We've got the Burning the Midnight Oil one, we've got this one which has been printed on pink, but it's actually going to be this nude one, and then we've got this super cute pink and red one. I'm going to whiz through the contents just so you can see what's in there and you can see if it works for you. Rest assured, whether you get a planner or not, the rest of the video will be applicable if you're at university, so don't worry about that. I'm going to put the designs on the screen so that you could read it much easier than me just holding it up. So at the beginning, it's got about 8 pages of setting up the planner, telling you what it's about and telling you how to use it. And then it has a getting to know you section. I think this is incredibly important, and we're going to talk about this in a second, how much you need to know yourself, what type of studier you are, what type of motivation you need, what type of discipline you need, all of these various different things. You cannot work with yourself if you don't know yourself well, so there's a bit of a questionnaire at the beginning that helps you, I guess, dictate what your goals are and also where you're kind of lacking now in order to be able to improve on that and plan better. Then it goes into academic year planning. This has an overview of the year, then enough space for 4 semesters or term dates, so you could technically use this over even a year, course leader, supervisor, societies, clubs, assessment, exams. Then it goes into semester planning, which allows you space for goals for the semester, modules and classes, semester deadlines, and a huge section on semester reading. Then there's a double page spread for general notes on your planning. There's more space for notes throughout the entire planner, but just thought it would be useful at the stage that you're actually planning your semester or term. It has semester planning pages for 4 semesters / terms. So again, that could literally be used over a year, but the rest of the planner is dated. I played with doing it undated, but it actually made it really hard to genuinely be useful in terms of pointing you in the right direction to what you should be doing at any point in time when coming up to a deadline, etc, etc. Then there are a load of module and class planning pages, which you essentially do a breakdown of your topics, your assignments, your assessments, the weighting of them, the date they're due, the title, your supervisor, etc, etc, so that you can start really effectively planning your modules. Then we go into weekly and daily planning. So this is where it gets dated, and you can literally use this planner every single day in order to be able to plan your days, your weeks, your deadlines, etc, etc. So you have your weekly schedule to be able to write down all of your lectures, your societies, your night outs, your situationships. Then you have a to-do table for the week. So essentially this is breaking down your tasks for the entire week, which you're then going to be able to slot into your daily planning. This has space for you to carry over your tasks from your to-do list at the beginning of the week, or to-do table as we call them over here, and break it down for what you need to do today. So that might be a specific reading, it might be a part of an essay or an essay plan or whatever it might be, but just enables you to plan every day very effectively and make sure you're genuinely getting things done the way you need to get things done. There are literally hundreds of pages of this, so I've just flipped through all of that and I'm at page 416. It is thick, but it is carryable. Then there's the resources section at the back, which is what I really wanted to have in there. So this has every single tip I'm talking about today and more. It's got organisation and planning tips, note-taking tips, assignment tips, referencing tips, exam revision tips with full breakdowns. Then it's got some space for notes, and then this might be my favourite part of the entire planner. This is my dream revision table, 4 fucking years too late, printed into a planner so that every time you're coming up to studying for an exam, you can work out your revision timetable in a way that works for you, no matter what time of the day you like to study, whether you're a night owl, whether you're a morning person. I'll put it on the screen, you can see how it breaks down. I used to use this method every single time I was studying for an exam, and it helped me block out my time so effectively to the point that I would write this down on noted paper every single exam I was coming up to. And this is one of the biggest reasons I wanted to make this planner, because how the fuck is it so difficult to make a planner with genuinely good resources that are going to help you study for your exams? So there's obviously a how to use section, and then it's got pages and pages of revision timetables. Next, it's got an exam timetable. You can also fill in your assessments in your semester planning, but this is if you have like a long exam timetable. It has space for 40 exams, God help you. Then there are a few pages of deadline lists, and then there is a Gantt chart. Now, whether you use Gantt charts or not, you should know what a Gantt chart is. We're going to talk about this, but also in the planner, it shows you exactly how to use it with the how to use Gantt chart section. I can't talk you through all of this now. Go and watch a video on how to use a Gantt chart, but I wanted to put this down here because I think it's one of the most effective ways that you can plan a dissertation or a project and everything else. So as I mentioned, they go live on the 6th of June at 12 p.m. We don't want to create waste, so they'll be made to order in batches, and the window will only be open for 48 hours so that we can then get to work on making them. I say shameless plug because I genuinely do mean shameless plug. So much work and studying and research has gone into this. This is a compilation of pretty much everything I learned in terms of organisation and effective work at university, and has been a huge passion project. I joke about the fact that these planners are a hobby. I've been doing this outside of my work as something that I've really felt passionate about and really wanted to do. So if you know anyone going to university, grab them one. I promise you it will help them loads. If you were at university, I really hope that it helps you as much as it would have helped me at the time. I am incredibly proud of them. I say shameless plug, as I've said, because I am completely shameless about the fact that a huge amount of work has gone into those, and I think they're a fucking great product that I wish I would have had around. But let's get into the actual tips. So first things first, getting to know yourself. I believe this is completely essential when going to university, and I don't mean getting to know yourself in terms of like finding yourself, although that is important too. I mean getting to know yourself in terms of the type of person you are when it comes to work and stress. Are you the type of person who needs a little bit of tough love, needs a little bit more discipline, and needs a bit of a kick up the arse to be able to get everything you need done? Or are you the type of person who needs a little bit more perspective, needs to be able to step back, control their stress because you're already on top of things? If you're the type of person who gets overly stressed and needs to chill out more, you have to be able to give yourself perspective. You have to be able to control your mind when it comes to your stress. And in order to do that, you need to be able to work out the root cause of your stress. Obviously, when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about genuine anxiety or genuine mental health concerns. I'm talking about if you're someone who works yourself up very easily and needs to be able to give yourself some perspective and needs to be able to get better at the concept of controlling that mind and that stress. You also need to be able to work out whether you're the type of person who's stressed because you're like a type A and you're always stressed but you're also productive just because you're running around at like 100 miles per hour, or whether you're the type of person who's stressed and constantly stressed because you know you need to do things and you have this like urgency to do things, but you don't quite know how to tackle them, and therefore you're stressed because you don't have visibility and you don't know how to plan your time well, and you know there's loads of stuff to do but you don't know when you're going to do it, etc, 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 and basically create yourself a load of overwhelm based on the fact that you don't have visibility of everything you need to do or when you're going to do it. If you're the latter, you need visibility. You need to be able to get better at productivity techniques in order to be able to know how you plan your time, when you do things, etc, etc. Something like a planner, I don't care when you buy this one, you need to get better at visibility and productivity techniques in general in order to be able to plan your time effectively. And if you are the former, you probably need mindfulness more than you need productivity techniques. Your head is literally the only place you're ever actually going to be, so you might as well make it a nice place to be. I know that is not always easy, but if you're that type of person, university is going to give you a lot of stress and you need to learn to be able to be like up within the down, because otherwise you are going to like stress yourself into an early grave. And then again, if you are the type of person who needs an extra push, you are the exact person who needs the correct tool. Again, I don't fucking care if it's this planner, if it's your planner from Cost Cutter down the road, if it's a notebook. Actually, I do care if it's a notebook, because if you don't have the right tools, then not going to be able to do it anyway. But you cannot rely on yourself if you make the same mistakes over and over and over. And just remember that a mistake repeated more than once is a decision. So learn yourself and learn what you need and act accordingly. Stop fucking making the same mistake again. You are causing yourself a huge amount of stress, and you are probably meaning that you can do less of the things you actually love because you're spending your time doing poor planning and then working double the amount, thinking that you're allowing yourself to be more chilled. You're not being more chilled, you're being more stressed. General top tips, whistle stop tour. Number 1, install Grammarly on your computer. I'd recommend getting the paid version. This is not an ad at all, but I literally recommend this to everyone at work. I learned a huge amount through having the paid Grammarly version, just in terms of like better ways to construct sentences, and that is from someone who thinks that they have always been pretty good at constructing sentences. It will just make sure that you're not making silly, sloppy mistakes. Remember that in almost every single essay there's a percentage of it that's given purely for grammar and presentation and structure, etc, etc. I also don't care if it's a different, if there's a better tool than Grammarly now, I literally don't give a flying fuck. But install something that's going to mean that you're both learning when you see its corrections and also just not making sloppy mistakes. Number 2, get a newsfeed blocker. When you're working, work. There is no point going to the library when you want to be with your friends if you're not going to actually work, because then it is going to drag on for even longer. Pull yourself together, get it done, or just fuck the library. But don't sit there doing nothing and scrolling on your laptop. Actually work, or actually go out and play with your friends. You are literally giving yourself the worst of both worlds. 3rd, work out whether you're a music person or a no music person when it comes to work, and be genuinely honest with yourself about it. I know some people love lo-fi. I personally love working to classical music. I have a playlist on Spotify called Get the Fuck Back to Work, and it's got like thousands of followers based on the fact that it's just a great classical music playlist and very good for work. 4, find out how you study best, whether you're the type of person who studies best with a little bit of noise around you in a cafe or complete silence in the library, but genuinely learn that and genuinely operate according to it. Don't kid yourself. Again, if you're working, you might as well be working effectively. Turn off your phone to avoid distractions and create a set amount of time that you're going to do that work and that you're going to focus. Again, otherwise everything's going to drag on for so long, you're going to feel burnt out, but you're also going to get half the work done. 5, use Forest. Again, don't care if there's a better version now. Forest, the app. There was also one called Flora, I believe, and essentially you tap the thing and it grows a tree, and if you open your phone and use any other app, then you kill the tree. There are ones where you can actually also grow trees, so yay environment and yay your grades. You can also do them with friends. I feel like getting people on a similar study time to you is very important for feeling that kind of joint motivation and joint accountability. Then 6, make it easier for yourself. This sounds very simple, but try out what organizational methods work for you. That might be color coding, that might be rewriting your notes in your own handwriting, labeling, keep your notes in order. You will create 3 days extra work when it comes to revision if all of your stuff is not in order. So just go like, it takes you like 5% more effort to do that at the time, and about 100% more effort if you don't do it when you come to exam season. You will thank your future self for it. Respect your future self. That is one of the best forms of self-care. Then 7, take care of yourself. Self-explanatory, but rest is productive. Working all the time is not productive. If you do not have time for rest, then you are not going to be working effectively. You're just going to be busy. Do exercise, take regular breaks, know how long you focus best for, socialize with friends, block it into your day. Start understanding how long you focus best for and when you fall off a fucking cliff, and stop trying to make the impossible happen when you're planning your day. Plan according to your limits rather than planning against your limits and then being surprised when the same thing happens again, and after 6 hours in the library, your head fucking falls off. 8, take advantage of open hours. Ask questions. You are paying for tuition. I think this is one of the biggest differences between school and university. Obviously some people's families pay for school, but I think there's this like, we go into university with the same type of mindset as school in terms of being like, I want as little kind of tuition time as possible. I mean, I know people don't think that, but you're paying over 9 fucking grand a year in the UK. If you're in the US, you're paying about £1 billion a year. Make the most of it. It is not a chore. Get the most help you possibly can. If you don't understand something, email someone until they literally cannot ignore you anymore, or take advantage of open hours. But you are paying for tuition. Get your money's worth. You are going to spend double that time trying to work it out yourself anyway, so you might as well take advantage. And then number 9, I highly, highly recommend this, especially if you're not someone who can kind of read for hours. Use multimedia resources and get interested in what you're actually doing. It will be 10 times more interesting. Your work will be 10 times better. If you're starting work on an essay around something, watch a documentary on it, watch a YouTube video on it, listen to a podcast on it. I know you probably don't want to be doing work outside of work times, but the more interested you can get in an overarching kind of approach of a topic, the better essay or project or understanding you're going to be able to have in general, and therefore the better work you're going to be able to do. Again, I know you don't want to spend all your fucking time listening to like a podcast about Stalin, but I promise you a multimedia approach will contribute to your understanding of a topic and therefore your ability to write on it or understand complexities within the topic so much more. So just like get a little bit interested in it, even if you're like, fuck this. How to plan your time effectively. Let's first talk about like semester and term planning. I think it's really easy to come back into a term and be set your first piece of work and just go on your way. No. Boo. Always, 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 always do a semester or term plan when you are returning to university. You need to get really, really, really clear on what your whole semester, term, trimester, whatever the fuck you want to call it, looks like, what your deadlines are, what your biggest modules are, what's weighted heaviest, what societies you want to do, what clubs you want to do, what teams you want to get into. I would really, 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 really recommend you write down a list of all of your deadlines within that semester, all of your assignments, assessments, lectures, tutors. Nothing should come as a surprise. Of course, you're gonna like, things are gonna slip in your mind as it goes along, but at the beginning of it, you should know every single thing that is going to be coming your way within that term, and then you will be able to plan so much more effectively. Also, if you're the type of person who generally just feels like stress because everything's like floating around in their head, having that down on a piece of paper means that you can drop some of the stuff in your head that you know you're going to have to do at the end of the term, because you can just concentrate on the stuff you need to do now. It also means that if there's like an essay due at the end of the term and you don't realize it's actually going to take you the entire term to write it, you have visibility of that at the beginning. Set aside just like 2 hours just to do this at the beginning of every term. Set clear semester goals, learn all your deadlines, or at least put them in your calendar, put them in your Google Calendar as well. It's 2023, pull yourself together, use a Google Calendar. Then you can slot in societies, clubs, etc, etc. I think lots of us a lot of the time have like all of these goals in our heads, like I want to do this, I want to do this, but we don't actually know when or how we're going to be able to do them. And I want you to be able to get a really clear view of when and how you're doing all of these things at the beginning of the term, so that you can do them most effectively and so that you can do more things you actually want to do. It is a rule of life. The more you want to do, the more you need to plan. So get fucking used to it and start practicing it at university. Module planning. Module planning as part of this is important too. Obviously working out which modules you have in your semester will be part of your semester planning, and then just breaking down your modules. Again, it doesn't need to be at the same time. That would probably take you a whole day to be able to do all of that. But when you start on a module, just break it down. What are the assessments in there? What are the assignments in there? What is the main reading in there? What's your lecture timetable? Just get to grips with the module. And then obviously weekly planning. I know at this stage it's starting to sound like loads and loads and loads of planning, but remember that you spend a fucking load of time on TikTok in the evening. So you do have the time, and I promise you it will allow more time for you to be able to do whatever the fuck you want to do if you just get into the habit of doing these at the beginning of everything you're doing. So whether that's a project, whether that's a semester, whether that's a week, whether that's a module, just getting clear on visibility. Visibility counts for so much, because that is exactly what takes it out of your brain and puts it on paper, so you stop being surprised when it like jumps up on you. Then just a little note on non-negotiables. On each day of the student planner, and if you're not a student for some reason and you're watching this video, each day of the normal planner, every single day write down 3 things that you're going to get done that day that would make that day a success. At university, they're probably not just going to be work-related things. It might be one specific reading, but it might also be going and talking to your tutor about something, whatever it might be. Don't make them things you're going to tick off within the first 5 minutes of your day, but make them things that are generally linked to your overall semester goals. The reason I think this is such a good way of doing things is you start to realize that sure, it feels like you have 100 things to do at any given time, but really probably 3 of them are the most important things that if you did them today would be a quote-unquote success. So just start getting in the habit of doing that every single day. I put that up on my Instagram story almost every single day. Not a plug, you don't need to follow me there, I do not care, but just get into the habit of doing it, and I promise you'll start to see yourself get a little bit less overwhelmed, and also just start making progress in the things that genuinely matter. But yeah, just start to get in the habit of this. It's something that I find is useful far beyond university. How to stick to deadlines. As I said, I made it my life's mission at university not to miss a single deadline, even if they were like arbitrary, like, oh, hand it in to me by this day and it's not examined, which obviously none of my stuff was until that last term, but you have to get good at deadlines. The amount of time people spend at university doing all-nighters on the last night because they haven't truly worked out how long it takes them to do something, or just set themselves enough time to do it. I promise you it would have taken you half the amount of time, and it would have been doubly as good if you get clear on what deadlines you have, when you have them, and when you're going to essentially approach the task. The golden rule when it comes to deadlines is that the deadline is not your deadline. Wait, I think I did that backwards. The deadline is not your deadline. You have to work to buffers. I promise you, if you tell yourself something's due on the 12th of May, you'll start working back from the 12th of May as if you can actually be making finishing touches on the 12th of May. You cannot work to a buffer and just change the deadline in your head. I don't care if it says 12th of May there. Decide in your head it's actually the 7th of May and just start thinking it's the 7th of May. Write it in as the 7th of May. Things are always going to come up, whether it is your friend's 21st birthday party, whether it is your situationship falling apart, whether it is a sports social, whether it is a hangover. Something is always going to come up, especially at university, and doing this doesn't allow you to be less fun, it allows you to be more fun because you actually give yourself the time to be able to buffer and account for these things that are going to inevitably pop up. As we've already spoken about, get very clear on what deadlines you have in each term, each module, etc, etc. Put them in your electronic calendar, put them in your planner. Electronic calendar just means that, like, if you lost your planner or whatever it might be, it will just pop up on your phone. Learn how to use a Gantt chart, it's in the planner. If you don't know how to use it, I'm sure there's a simple YouTube video on how to use a Gantt chart. It's really not that complicated. It looks really complicated, but it is a really, really, really good way of planning everything that goes into a project, a dissertation, an essay, etc, etc. And then set aside a planning afternoon or 2 hours, whatever, on each module or project you have. Never, ever, ever, ever start a project without having done the planning for it. You are going to get so overwhelmed and you're going to end up doing double the work for half the result. Set aside planning time for every single project, every single essay. It sounds like a lot, but I promise you that time is going to be eaten up by you trying to work out what the fuck is the next step when you're 3 steps into your 10-step project when you didn't plan it from the beginning. As I've already talked about, my course wasn't examined at all until the last 10 days, and then I had 40,000 words due on one day, and then I had 10 days of exams. So obviously, if I'd worked to that deadline, I would have been absolutely fucked. About like 6-7 months before that deadline, I started working out like what the actual deadline would be. Like if each of those essays, those like dissertations essentially, is going to take me 8 weeks, for example, I really need to do the first one of those about 6 months before. And I know that is a fucking stupid system and not every university is going to have that because some people have brains. I really think that's why they do it. They do it to essentially look like, oh yeah, this is due on the X of May, whereas actually you're going to have to do it in December to also get all of the other things you need to do done up to that point. So remember, the deadline is not your deadline, and if you plan, you'll understand that and you'll know what your deadline actually is. I would also recommend, if you have a load of things done due at the same time, to set aside those kind of buffers for how long it's going to take you for each and work in your own deadlines, but then also come back to all of them at the end and allow yourself probably 2 days to review each of those things, because you're going to get better and better across each of those essays, and then you're going to go back and read the first one and be like, was I on crack? How to write a good essay. I could obviously do a whole 20 fucking videos on how to write a good essay, but seeing as this video is generally about productivity at university and how to approach all of this, and I don't know what topic you're doing, I don't know what type of subject it is, etc, etc, I'm going to talk to you about the process that I use in order to write an essay. You'll have other things that you like to do, you'll have things you disagree on, great, that means you know your style. If you don't, try this, tweak it to how you actually prefer it, talk to other people, take other people's advice, tell me mine is terrible, but this was like my 10,000 words a week, shit hot method. First of all, gather resources. Obviously, the most of the time, if this is within your module, it's going to come with a reading list, but if it's a dissertation, it's probably not going to come with a reading list. You're going to need to compile that yourself. As I talked about before, I recommend also working things in there like documentaries, podcasts. There's fucking something on everything at the moment. I promise you, you can find some sort of deep dive into your topic on a podcast or on a YouTube video, even if it has 3 views. But you might as well use the work someone else has done and spent a lot of time on to at least inspire you to start yours. Make sure within this to gather primary sources, secondary sources, and contemporary modern public discussion. So you basically want to make sure you have like, if you were talking about a manuscript, for example, you'd want to make sure you had primary sources, aka the manuscript itself, secondary sources, so critique that people were doing on the primary source or around the primary source, then general public discussion, so whether that's contemporary, whether that's at the time that the manuscript was there, or whether that is also now, or, you know, recent scholarship, whatever it might be. Make sure you always have a mix of your resources. Write a list of these down, but also obviously make it manageable based on the time you have. You are only going to overwhelm yourself with pretty much every single topic out there, because remember, there are academics focusing on whatever you're doing for their entire lifetime, so you're obviously only going to be able to do what you're going to be able to do. But I would just try and make it as well-rounded as possible in terms of the breadth of that resource. Again, totally depends on your subject matter, but that is very much how I would approach it. If this is something like a dissertation or a bigger project, fill in a Gantt chart so that you know exactly which days you are reading, noting, planning, writing, etc, etc, but also at the beginning making sure you're knowing, like, oh, this day I'm doing these 3 readings. You'd always rather be over than under planned, and it always takes less time than you actually think, especially when counting for the amount of time you're going to be overwhelmed if you don't do it. 2, plan your time. What I've just talked about, Gantt chart. You need to know when each stage of this essay planning process, trademark sign, is going to be done. 3, start reading. My personal way of note-taking when I was reading was creating one big document. I actually never really used those referencing tools. I did it all manually just because I found it easier that way. Again, you can use referencing tools that work for you, test them, watch a YouTube video on them, take the hard work out of it for you. But for me, what I would do is I would create one big doc, and I would have the reading title, and, you know, each page I went through, I'd have a new title of the page so that I could reference things properly. And then I would get the reading up on my laptop if it was possible, if it was on like JSTOR or something, but obviously not always possible, so sometimes I would go to the library and I'd actually type it out. Obviously that takes longer, but I do feel like transferring notes, rather, I never ever just went through something and highlighted, because then you're going to have to do the work again to go and get the notes you want. You really want them in one doc. And what I would do is, so I'd transfer the notes to this doc, and then when I started to learn the argument, so it might be like for, against, arguments around the topic, or like a specific chapter, I'd start color coding the notes as I was taking them down. So say I read something on the for argument, I would transfer it and I'd just color code it in the for thing. And that would basically just mean that when I went back to writing the essay, if I wasn't really sure what to say next or where there was a supporting quote for, I would be able to go through that specific color. This sounds complicated, but I promise you it didn't actually take any longer. I would just have one side of my screen the reading, one side of my screen the note taking. It would be on a big document. I'd start color coding it if I knew exactly what argument it would fit into when I was taking the notes, but also when I got into the planning stage, I would start essentially lifting quotes and putting them in the skeleton plan, which we're going to talk about next. And I promise you it makes it so much easier rather than coming to writing an essay and having 42 pages of notes. I really advise color coding it. Literally highlight, click the color, takes 2 seconds. Then number 4, skeleton essay plan. This would be a very basic brief of how you think the essay is going to be structured. So basically a contents page for your essay, not actually, but just a intro outlining this primary source, this, like, as in, I'm talking skeleton. Do not even think of skipping this part. You cannot write a good essay without having a good plan. You will sound like a child writing their journey to the center of the moon that they had to write in year 3. Then number 5, start on the detailed essay plan. So I'd actually start to slot my quotes, my resources, my, you know, any notes I'd taken on like an argument I wanted to make into each section of the skeleton, and then I'd start to build that out. If I found a particularly interesting sentence, I'd actually start writing sentences around that, to the point that some of my detailed essay plan notes would basically turn into like the essay itself. Then number 6, obviously flesh out individual sections into the full essay. This is hugely oversimplified. If you're doing a dissertation, you're going to want to know the order that you're doing your chapters in, you're going to want to know all of these different things. But again, this is just the general overall process that I'd recommend you start with. Then 7, leave for a day. Always leave a buffer in your deadline schedule to leave it for a day, because I promise you, you're going to get so in your own head when you're writing it, and you're going to think you know what you mean, and then you're going to read it back and be like, what the fuck was I saying here? leave it for a day. Give yourself some time, spend that day doing something else, whatever it might be, whether it's play or another bit of work, whatever. Just leave yourself a day to then go back over it. 8 would be the review, so you need to proofread, you need to leave time for a bibliography, you need to make sure you've referenced correctly. And in general, I would always recommend that, sorry I should have said this earlier, but I would always recommend that you write your introduction and conclusion last, because you really want to set up what you're going to be arguing in your introduction. It's not like the type of essay we were taught to do in like year 4 where it was like set the scene, then do for or against, then come to a conclusion. You're arguing something from the beginning, so you should be talking about it at the beginning. How to reference, I'm going to keep this super brief. I've got a whole section on this in the student planner itself, but basically just make sure you know which referencing style your university uses. They should tell you when you join. If not, it will be on like their website or whatever student portal you have, or you can ask around or ask your tutor. But you must use the same style throughout your assignment, so don't like mix and match, and don't just choose one because you particularly like it if it's not allowed by your university. Stick to it and make it easier. If you find this something you forget a lot, use a referencing tool. There are so many good ones. There's EndNote, there's Mendeley, there's Zotero. I don't know what the good one is now, but find one, use one, love it. Use it, don't make mistakes. Right, how to write a good dissertation. Again, this is going to be hugely simplified, but I just wanted to kind of brain dump all of the things that I think are pretty universal regardless of the topic you're doing. And my experience of this was having to write it in like 2 fucking weeks or something ridiculous. Okay, first and foremost, try to identify, I don't know what the case is with other universities, but we're not given a supervisor for our dissertations. I'm not sure anyone is, but I don't know. But it meant that really early on you want to identify people who you think could be a good supervisor for it. So someone who's kind of in and around that topic. One of the best things about Oxford, to be honest, was the fact that you could work with the person who wrote like the main book on the topic, and that was hugely exciting for me. But I was literally like begging professors like, please be my supervisor, and they were like, no. But anyway, there we go, rejection is important. Try and talk to your supervisor about an initial title. It sounds like the title's not very important because generally title wouldn't be important, but it is relatively important to have an interesting title that definitely also isn't too big as a topic. I think that we spend our life and our like GCSEs and A-levels or whatever your school exams are if you're from another country, doing small essays on huge topics that we can't even like hit the surface of, just because obviously that's the only way we can be examined. But realistically, you want to choose a topic that's actually quite small for your dissertation and just go really deep on it. If you go surface level in a dissertation, you're not going to do well. So I remember I originally wanted to do my dissertation on Stalinist politics, essentially like censorship around that time and the result of that on music, so like the link between the political side and the musical side and all of that. And that is like one of the most written about topics ever, and obviously I was like, I find it really interesting. It's like, yeah, everyone finds it really interesting, that's why people have dedicated their entire lives to doing it. And then I ended up loving writing my dissertation. I did my dissertation on Amy Winehouse's Back to Black, talking a lot about cultural appropriation and race politics in music. And what I really liked about that was that I made it case study based on something that I could do genuine analysis of my own on it, because if you can do genuine analysis of your own, you're always going to do relatively well. I know it's different dependent on each topic or on each subject, but for me that meant that, you know, I wasn't tackling a huge topic that people had dedicated their whole lives to, and although there obviously were academics that had, it was something that I was genuinely able to bring my own like primary scholarship into it, which made my argument a lot stronger because I wasn't just doing less good versions of work that other people dedicate their whole life to doing, if that makes sense. So I would recommend making it as small as possible and case study based, and then you can do as much around that as you want with the kind of primary sources themselves in terms of analysis, the secondary sources, contemporary scholarship, etc, etc. And as always, and I know this sounds kind of ridiculous, but if there's a question in your title, make sure you can answer the question in your title. I think, again, we often make this so big as these topics, and if you can't fully answer it without writing a whole fucking book on the topic, don't do your dissertation on it. Reading list, obviously you're going to have to create your own reading list for your dissertation. Write a reading list based on primary literature, so scholarship, broader readings, find contemporary discussion around it, anything that you can find that that's actually like in popular culture now, I think often performs well and is less likely to have also been analysed, so can bring something truly original, which is always going to get you extra points. Write a reading list before you start. Obviously that will act as the first draft for your bibliography, and as you start reading, your bibliography will kind of grow from texts mentioned in the text you're reading or something you decide to dive deeper into, etc, etc. Keep it kind of malleable in the way that you could, you know, you're not entirely, I know you have to be set on a title, I think, at the beginning, or it depends. Usually you have to submit a title and get it approved. You could probably tweak slightly, but I think that, you know, keep it relatively malleable in that you might discover something when you're doing it that's recently been written about and you want to kind of deep dive into that and leave yourself that space. And then create a reading template. So on a dissertation, I know for essay planning I talked about a big document that was like all of your reading. You're probably not going to be able to do that because it's going to be fucking huge, but generally create a reading title, because you need to have things like the date you accessed it, the title of the reading itself or the paper itself, the URL. And then what I also did for this is I created myself a summary at the top. So like after I'd read it, I would just put a few bullet points like talks about these 3 things, has a deep dive on this, particularly useful for this topic. And I know that sounds like overkill, but actually it means that when you're coming back to look at things, you don't want to have to skim through all of your notes on a reading, or worse still, the entire reading itself, to be able to work out if it was the one you were thinking about that you want to cite. You'll kind of want to be able to come back to this and be like, oh, that paper was particularly good on talking about the politics of voice, or whatever it might be. When note taking, again, I believe in the same things as I kind of believed in when talking about how to plan an essay or how to write an essay. Color code. So while you're doing your own reading template, color code as you go along. So for example, I had a color coding across all of my notes that was quotes on race, voice, biography, and then I also put anything in bold that I thought was going to be central to my argument so that I could come back to it and easily see those drawn out in the correct color. Once I'd finished all of the different readings, I went back to the documents and I created a separate document for race, voice, biography, etc, etc. And then I could obviously start to write those specific arguments based on that, or if I needed a quote on voice, for example, I could go back to that and read through and try and find something really good. Planning is obviously incredibly important. I knew my title and I knew what I was going to say in my introduction. I'd kind of bullet pointed that, but I came back to my introduction way later. But when I was planning, I kind of outlined my chapters and added in the questions I wanted to ask throughout the chapters, and just kind of generally started a doc of like questions to ask, questions to answer. And my plan generally got like more and more detailed after I started like lifting those quotes into the appropriate document on their topic. And this generally became more and more detailed until like a whole chapter became basically like a bullet pointed essay. And I think you want to know at the beginning exactly what your key parts are going to be. Obviously this is going to develop with your reading, but I got to the point that by the end of my reading I knew really what my 4 chapters were going to be, and this is quite normal. This is not something like I particularly achieved. So you kind of want to make sure you know that at that point, and then it started being really easy to be like, oh, this quote would be great for this chapter, this question needs to be answered in this chapter, etc, etc. It just started being really easy, like knowing how it was all going to fit. And the last thing I obviously did was write my introduction and conclusion. I think one of the important things of making your title not vague, but not something that's like, did they go to the moon, that you're not genuinely going to be able to like fully answer, because you are going to have points deducted for not having answered the question. So mine was, what was it? My dissertation was actually used recently for an exhibition that they were doing on Amy Winehouse. How exciting is that? Back-to-back appropriation and the ethics of cultural grey out. So what that allowed me to do was to be able to, once I'd done all of it, because I had to get that, you have to get your title approved way in advance, and so that left it relatively open where I could essentially say in the introduction the specific questions I was going to be asking and answering without like my whole essay being contingent on like one big question in the title, if that makes sense. How to take good notes. Again, I have an entire section on this in the student planner, in the resources section, but I'm just going to go over very quickly, whistle stop tour, how to take good notes. Taking good notes is so important because you are going to use them as the basis of your revision when coming up to exams, the basis of your starting points when you're writing an essay or a dissertation. You just need good notes. First of all, structure them. You need a structured format to write your notes. Don't just like open the notes app and just start bullet pointing. Not helpful for when you're trying to find it later. Not helpful for when you're trying to turn it into an essay. Do the hard work for yourself at the beginning, because it literally takes 2 fucking seconds, whereas it will take you an hour to find something if you need to and you haven't labeled it or structured it correctly. Use headings, bullet points, tables, anything that will make it easier for you to review your notes later on. If you're the type of person who goes like, when looking at a load of bullet points like I am. Start to use things like tables, screenshot diagrams and add them in, whatever it might be. Don't do notes in a way that you know you're not going to understand them, especially if you found it hard to understand when the concept was first introduced to you. And then, the thing that I never did but I really should have done, review your notes on a regular basis. So at the end of every term, I just set aside some time just to go through your notes. I'm not sure if anyone's actually ever going to do this or if anyone has actually ever done this, but I wish I had, especially when I came to that last term. But just make sure they're all in order, make sure they're all structured correctly. I would also just read through them because you forget how much you learn in a term, and the more you keep going over them, the more you're going to develop a fuller understanding of the topic at hand. Second point I really advise is write in your own words. If you're listening to a lecture and something's like there's a bullet point written on the screen and you just copy it word for word, you don't genuinely understand it. You just know how to use Control-C, Control-V. So try rephrasing lectures and seminars in your own words in a way that you would actually say it, even if it's like shorthand and the way you text it to a friend. Just remember your notes are a note to you, they're not notes for anyone else, so bear that in mind. Then obviously just stay organized, keep everything in the right place, save things onto a Google Drive or an iCloud Drive or a whatever fucking tech company you want to use drive. Just don't lose them. And save things onto a hard drive and label things accordingly. So at the beginning of every term, when you're doing your term planning, create a folder on your computer for that module, for that term, and break it down into modules, and then you're going to be able to find everything when you need to find it. You fool. Then we're very quickly going to talk about how to create a revision timetable. This is my specialty, and I had a very clear way of doing my revision timetable, and I did not do badly in exams. I'm not the type, I have a very bad memory. So literally ask anyone I know. It's embarrassing how bad my memory is. I also suffered short-term memory loss when I was at university, so that didn't help. But I really see, I've forgotten what I'm saying. Really recommend getting a good revision technique, I guess, in the way you learn. So you're gonna need to know what stages you need to make your revision effective. You might be the type of person who could read some notes and remember it, in which case you're going to have fewer stages than someone who can really only know something when they've written a full essay on it without their notes or with their notes or telling their friend and teaching their whole friend about a topic. You need to understand how you actually absorb information best. Not just listen to information, but how you genuinely absorb information enough to be able to replicate it down on paper or answer a question with that in mind. Also, what's going to affect your revision timetable is your semester, term, trimester, whatever the fuck, and the planning at the beginning. So you need to know when your revision is going to start by the planning stage at the beginning, and that is going to be easy because you're going to do your afternoon of term planning, and then you're going to be very clear on when your revision is going to start, aren't you? At the beginning of your revision planning process, so I used to do this for GCSEs, for A-levels, set aside half a day to get on top of and create your revision timetable. What you're going to do in this time is you are going to write down a full list of your exams. Then you are going to break down each of the exams into a full list of the topics within those exams. So, you know, a module might have 8 separate topics in it. You can do this literally by a kind of like spider diagram. So you can have your list of exams, and then you're going to have spiders off those exams in terms of the topics in each of those exams, and then in each of the topics you're going to have another spider which might be key sources you need to know, or key reading material you need to like know quotes out of, or whatever it is, totally dependent on the subject. But this is going to start to give you a very clear idea of how much time you need per exam, because there might be 2 exams that are both 3 hours, but actually one of them has 3 different questions in there, and so actually has, you know, a huge amount of topics to do in there, where one of them is 1 essay in that 3 hours, and so has far less. Then you can plan out how many sessions. I always worked by having 3 sessions a day, so that can work how it works for you. Mine would be a morning session and 2 afternoon sessions, so a morning session up to lunch, and then an afternoon session up to like 2-3 p.m. and then a late afternoon session. Again, completely depends what works for you. You might have shifts to fit in there. You might work better in the evening. You might work better even earlier and be able to do 2 sessions before lunch. But I would generally work with 3 sessions a day. My sessions would generally be around 1.5 to 2 hours. So basically what you then have by this spider diagram is you have an ability to work out how many sessions you're going to need for each of these things. And you also need to work out what those are going to look like. So if you have 3 sources to go through, it might be You might need just one session to go through all of them because you're just reading through notes for them, or you might need one session for each of them because you need to do like a deep dive into those sources and to really get those notes. Again, it's totally dependent on the subject, but I would get really clear on like exactly what in a dream world you were going to have, like one session on this, one session with these 3 things in it, etc, etc. Revision will differ from subject to subject. I feel like a good structure is to give yourself work slots for the following. Listen closely. 1, refamiliarizing yourself with the topic and any note taking you didn't do at the time. So very surface level. At this stage, you're not really like learning anything, but you're reading over old essays, you're getting very clear on what the entire exam could cover, or what the entire module could cover. This includes note taking, it includes reading, it includes like pointers for things you need to look at. I generally recommend that you fit as much as possible into a few sessions as possible. So you probably want, like, to start yourself off in the module, you probably want like 2 to 3 1.5 hour sessions going through all of this. You know, you generally know what all of the topics are in the module and know them in like semi-depth, but you've just read them, you haven't actually done like essay plans or practice papers for them. Then number 2, it's the actual planning, but it's with notes. I think one of the best ways to learn is to plan your dream essays with the notes themselves. So you're making them like the best essays you possibly can, obviously like within an allocated time and like handwritten if you can, if you're doing the exams handwritten. This is going to help like the information actually go in, and is going to, like, when you're like writing an argument and you're like, oh, what could support this, and you go through your notes, the next time you're much more likely to remember that because you did it with the notes that time. So second block of revision would be planning with notes, so doing practice papers with notes to basically make sure you're getting them almost completely right, because that will, you're basically setting up the pathways in your brain for exactly what the exam would be if you had your notes. Again, this differs so much from subject to subject because some people even can have their notes in exams, or some people, you know, there's like things, there's all of these different nuances to different subjects, but I'm just going based off a humanities exam without notes basically, which is generally what I did. And then number 3 is actual practice papers, and I think this is incredibly important. Usually this gets like crunched at the end. I think the note-taking one is more important, but I do think you absolutely never go into an exam without having done a practice paper or a practice timed essay or a practice like whatever. Just do not do it. That is so, so, so important. So those are the 3 blocks of kind of like what the journey or the stages of what your revision is made up of. I would keep the surface level refamiliarizing stuff very, very short. So as I said, 2 or 3 blocks, and the blocks would be 1.5 hours to 2 hours, dependent on how you work best, on each module at the beginning. And then I would say the biggest stage is that doing papers with notes. And then at the end, you want to tail it off with some practice papers. Never do a practice paper and not go over it afterwards. You absolutely have to make sure, otherwise you're just doing it and you're never like perfecting it, you're just doing it. So once you've done this kind of like module plan, and you have kind of like module stage 1, module stage 2, module stage 3, which are the things I've just talked through, you can then start slotting them into a revision timetable. So you could have a week, for example, where like day 1 was doing the stage 1 stuff. And just remember, if you're doing that stage 2, the practice with notes, is going to take you double the time to what it takes in the exam, because you're trying to do a really good version of it. And then so say you had like 3 days of stage 2 revision on each of the topics, so that was kind of like 9 different blocks, and each time you were doing a whole new topic and an essay in that topic, and then you would have the last day being stage 3, which is actual practice papers and that stuff. This is how I broke down my revision, and it never failed me in terms of genuinely knowing the topics. Totally depends how you or your subject does it and what kind of works for you best, but that personally for me was a really, really, really good method for making sure I actually knew things inside out. And I would always plan according to that stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 revision, and I would put those blocks into my revision block, which is obviously in the student planner, but you can draw that thing up yourself if you don't want to buy it. General revision tips, again, there's a full section on this in the student planner. But general ones, start early, do not wait until the last minute. It is not going to save you time and give you more chill, it is going to give you more stress. Begin your revision planning process as soon as possible, because I promise you, when you're doing stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, it's going to take longer than you think, but you just need to be very clear on how much time you're going to need to feel confident. So even if halfway through the term you started planning when you need to start revision for the end of term, I personally would advise that, and I would put in your diary the day you're going to do revision timetable planning halfway through the semester. You're also going to retain information so much better if you started earlier. I was not the type of person who started months before at all, because I just wouldn't retain it, but I was the type of person who would start a month before and be able to have a kind of like more intensive period but really retain it well, because I was doing different types of revision. I also think the night before an exam, unless you really don't know things, the best thing you can be doing is working with someone who's also within your topic and teaching each other things. So asking each other a question and being like, how would you structure an essay on X, and then go, well, I would do the intro about this, then I would do the fore argument, I would use these two sources, then I would do this, I would do these two sources, and then I would do the conclusion, or like whatever it would be. Because teaching someone, you can only teach someone something if you genuinely know it, and I feel like that's what's going to really get it in your brain. And you can only spend so much time writing, and you also don't want to tire yourself out or stress yourself out. You want to be able to get like live feedback, and I think that teaching someone that is the quickest way you could do it. Prioritize important topics, obviously kind of goes without saying. Look at past papers. Your university should probably have a past exam paper portal. If not, also I used to ask people I knew at like whole different universities who were doing my subject, you know, whether they'd done something or something, so that I could see their past exam papers, all of that. It's not about trying to predict the exam paper, it's trying to see like the breadth of questions that could be asked. But obviously focus on the most important ones first. If there's something that always comes up, or there's an A and B section and the A section is always on something, your best bet is to focus and prioritize on that one, but obviously don't skip the other ones. As I've already talked about, be an active learner. Spending time poring over textbooks is not a good way to revise. I personally think that at the revision stage you shouldn't even be using textbooks, you should only be using your own notes. But if obviously you get to that stage and you're like, oh my god, I fucking missed this lecture because I was hungover as fuck, and then you have to go back and address that. But basically you shouldn't just be reading over textbooks as a way to revise. That is not a way to revise. You should be doing active learning, so teaching past papers with notes, without notes. Like, you don't even also need to be writing a full essay any of the time, really. I used to do bullet point essay plans all the time. Like, I don't want to write like in the and like and like all of this. I just want to be going like bullet points, like these are my arguments, and then you're like, that's the type of thing you'll be writing out when you're doing it. Take breaks. Do not study for hours without taking breaks. You are not going to be able to retain information. You are going to get yourself into a mess. You are going to burn yourself out. Plan in the breaks. This is why I think that time planning is so important. You need to be able to avoid burnout. It is a marathon, not a sprint, especially if you start at the right time. You'll know if you're the type of person who needs to recharge around people or not around people. I personally am the type of person who needs my own time, but actually the only thing that will get my mind off it when I've been like in deep work is like seeing friends to distract me completely. So just learn again what type of person you are. I also will say, when you're working, do not have your phone on, do not have your phone near you. Use Forest, because you will retain information so differently. That is pretty much as I can fit into this video. I have no idea how long this video is going to be. I've taken up 2 camera batteries. I have been recording for at least 2 hours, and those notes were thousands and thousands and thousands of pages long. No. Incorrect. That's a complete lie. I did not write the Bible. They're thousands of words long, but I hope this was really helpful. I hope this is something that you can refer back to again and again. I'm really glad that I took the time to finally consolidate this. I wrote the notes for this on like a long flight and literally just went through, like, broke it down in terms of like, I did this how I would plan an essay to make sure that I had everything that was kind of like surface level information and kind of recommendations that I wanted to give, to be able to, I guess, like consolidate all of my years of doing uni vlogs and all of like the tips I learned along the way. And I was also like, when I was at uni and I was filming a lot of the time, I was terrified of being like, oh, I've just learnt this now, and then I thought people would think I was stupid, and I was definitely young and more like insecure and blasted onto the internet. I wanted to make sure that there was like a place now where I could put everything that I'd learnt, whether it's something that you find useful or not. I do think one of my like real talents is planning and kind of time management and being able to do quite a lot. Like, I am a very sociable person, but I also want to do really well. I have really big goals for my life. I'm very clear on like the type of life I want to live, and I will do whatever it takes to get there in terms of, you know, planning my life to the nines to make sure that I can, you know, I don't plan my life because I love work. I plan my life because I want to be able to do more. I want to be able to see my friends. I want to be a good girlfriend and friend and sister and like all of these different things, and also have fun and also reach my goals and all of that. So literally just rambling about myself, but because I feel like it is important to learn quite early on that planning is not about being boring, it's about setting yourself up for success. And I feel like at university there's like this perception, especially at like universities my friends went to, I heard a lot about this, there were these kind of perceptions that you just like needed to be having fun all the time and then just like squeeze other things in. And I think both a very unrealistic expectation, but also the majority of people don't come to university knowing absolutely everything they're going to learn. And if you do, you're probably from private school and you probably have like a real advantage, like unfair advantage. And I think the majority of people need to be given better tools to be able to actually plan their work and learn and have time to do societies and teams and whatever they want to do effectively. But yeah, I hope you really enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. I'll put chapters on all of it. I've tried to put as much on the screen as possible to make it really easy to take notes and learn from it. Obviously, I know this isn't exhaustive, as I've already said. I'm really passionate about this, stupidly. You know, as someone who peaked at uni, it's tough. As I mentioned, student planners live 6th of June, midday. They're chunky, but they're designed to be your Bible when you're at university, so you can literally just turn over the page, do the next thing, and it tells you what to do to be planning well and takes the hard work out of that for you. Wanted it to be the perfect gift for someone going to university, and I appreciate that it's not the cheapest thing in the world, but I'm sure you can see how much work's gone into it. They're also not cheap to produce. They are 100% recycled, and they are nearly 500 pages. So here we are. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you have any requests or suggestions, and I'll probably never do them, but like, it's lovely to know. I will try. And I hope you have a wonderful day.